My ex-husband showed up after 15 years. Of all the places, he came back at my daughter's funeral. He had the nerve to demand half of her $35 million fortune as compensation, he called it, for all the years he chose to disappear. And my poor son, his head poisoned by a lifetime of lies, stood right there beside him, his ally, looking at me like I was a complete stranger. It felt like a fist was squeezing my heart shut. This wave of pure rage and helpless grief just washed over me, felt like it was burning me from the inside out. Right there at my daughter's final resting place, they started a war. They figured that me, a heartbroken 70-year-old woman, would just roll over and give in. They were dead wrong. If you've ever been betrayed by the person you loved most, if you've ever had to fight for the truth when it felt like the whole world was against you, then pull up a chair and listen to my story. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 70 years old, and on that day, my whole world had shrunk down to the size of a cherry wood casket. Inside was Clara, my daughter, my genius, the very beating heart of my life. $35 million, the value of Age's Health, the company she'd built from scratch, couldn't stop those awful cancer cells from spreading. Clara's will was crystal clear, just like everything she ever did. Every asset, every share, all of it went to me, her mother, Eleanor Vance. A simple, neat arrangement, a final fortress to protect me. Or so I thought. I was sitting in the front pew of the Old South Church, feeling the chill of the marble seeping through my thin wool coat. The pastor was talking about Clara's legacy, and I was trying to cling to those words. But then a disturbance at the back of the church shattered that fragile solemnity. It was Richard and Leo. But this time, there was no intimidating silence. Instead, it was a performance worthy of Broadway. Richard Thorne, the man who hadn't shed a single tear when he left his 8-year-old daughter, was now stumbling down the aisle, his face crumpled into a mask of perfectly rehearsed grief. "Clara! Oh, my baby girl!" he wailed, the sound echoing through the quiet space. Heads turned and whispers erupted like a disturbed beehive. He threw himself at the casket, his hands gripping the wood, his body shaking with dramatic sobs. "They took you from me! They tore you away!" he cried, but his dry eyes flickered toward me for just a second, a calculated glint that was there and gone. And then he turned and pointed right at me, his voice trembling with agony. "It was her. She kept me away. I tried. God, how I tried. I called. I wrote letters. I wanted to be with my daughter in her final days. But she blocked everything. She stole my last moments with my baby." Leo stood behind him, his face a mixture of genuine pain and programmed anger. He looked at me as if I were a monster. The stage had been set perfectly. In the eyes of everyone there, I was no longer a grieving mother. I was the wicked ex-wife who had kept a poor, loving father from his dying child. The storm had officially made landfall, not with a distant thunder, but with a bolt of lightning straight into the heart of my daughter's funeral. That night, my house in Brooklyn, once filled with Clara's laughter, was suffocatingly silent. I was making a cup of tea when the doorbell rang. I knew who it was. I'd been expecting it. When I opened the door, Richard and Leo stood under the pale yellow porch light. They looked like a caricature of a father and son. Richard with his slick smile, Leo with a scowl, his arms crossed like a reluctant kid being dragged to a parent-teacher conference. "Eleanor," Richard began, his voice smooth as velvet, "we need to talk." I didn't invite them in, just stood blocking the doorway. "There's nothing to talk about, Richard." "Oh, I think there is," he said, easing past me into the house, pulling Leo with him. My son avoided my gaze, his eyes scanning the photos of Clara on the wall with a practiced detachment. Richard got right down to business. Not a word of condolence, not a shred of respect for my grief. Clara left behind a considerable legacy. Age's health is worth $35 million, if the papers are to be believed. It's her legacy, I replied, my voice like ice.
Now, Eleanor, that's where you're mistaken, Richard said, sliding a folder across the table toward me. My lawyer has already drafted it. It's called undue influence. Richard smirked. We'll argue that you, Eleanor, took advantage of Clara's illness, manipulated her in her final days to write a will that only benefited you, intentionally cutting out her only father and brother. A tragic story, isn't it? The papers will eat it up. I picked it up, my hands trembling with rage. It was a professionally packaged bundle of legal nonsense. It spun a tall tale of Richard's quiet sacrifice to raise Leo, of his indirect contributions to Clara's early education, and of the emotional distress of being isolated from his daughter's success. More importantly, it claimed I had taken advantage of my daughter's weakened state to forge a will in my favor. It demanded the court invalidate a portion of Clara's will and award 50% of the estate to the long-suffering father and the forgotten son. "This is ridiculous," I whispered. Leo, seeing my expression, spoke up, his voice full of a misguided confidence. "It's the truth. Dad sacrificed everything for me. And you never even tried to get in touch. 15 years, not one letter, not one call. You erased me from your life. This is what Dad and I deserve." "That's not true." I shut up, my voice cracking. I tried. Lord, how I tried. I sent letters, I sent birthday and Christmas gifts every single year. But they all came back. Your father moved without a forwarding address. He blocked my number. Richard just shrugged, a pitying half-smile on his face. "Oh, Eleanor, still with the fairy tales. It's sad to see you stoop to this. If you really sent anything, where is it? Where's the proof? Or is it all just in your head?" His question was a slap in the face. I froze. The proof? It was sitting in the attic, collecting dust in old boxes. But before I could say a word, Leo spoke again, his voice flat but heavy. "Dad said you changed your number, moved, cut off all contact. You chose her over me. You had everything and we had nothing. Now that she's gone, the least you can do is make things right for me. The son you abandoned, the brother she didn't care about." His words were like shards of glass in my heart. I wanted to scream that it was all a lie, that his father was the one who vanished, who blocked my calls, who returned every letter. But looking at the solid wall in Leo's eyes, I knew my explanations were worthless. Richard smiled, a victor smile. "We're not asking for much, just what's fair. Half for Leo to make up for what he's owed, and half for my sacrifice. We're a team, Eleanor, and we're not leaving empty-handed." A week later, the official lawsuit arrived. The cold legal jargon on the paper hurt more than the venomous words in my living room. Richard had hired David Roth, a shark of a lawyer in Boston, a man who didn't care about the truth, only about winning. The next day, I met with my lawyer, Mark. "This is a serious threat, Eleanor," he said after I told him everything. "An undue influence claim is a nightmare. Even though it's a complete lie, Roth will demand Clara's medical records, depose doctors, nurses. He'll paint a picture of you as a domineering, controlling mother who took advantage of her dying daughter. It will do serious damage to Clara's reputation and the value of Age's health, even if we win." "But it's all lies," I nearly shouted. "I know," Mark said wearily. "But in court, the truth sometimes matters less than the more compelling story. And they have Leo, a son willing to testify against his own mother. That adds a lot of weight to their argument." That's when I felt truly alone. Even the law, the people who were supposed to be on my side, were pushing me towards a humiliating settlement.
He thought for a long moment, then asked, "Eleanor, did you happen to keep any of those gifts or letters you sent to Leo?" "Of course," I answered immediately. "They're all in the attic." "All right," he said. "I have a plan." After my meeting with Mark, I went home. That night, I sat alone in the dark, looking out at the garden Clara had planted. I realized this wasn't about money anymore. This was a fight for the truth, for Clara's memory, and maybe, just maybe, for the son I had lost. I wasn't going to back down. Even if I had to burn the whole world down, I would not let Richard's lies win. The following nights became a long blur of sleeplessness and memories. I went up to the attic where I'd stored the broken pieces of my life. The smell of dust and old paper, the scent of stalled time filled my nose. And I found them. 2 large cardboard boxes with "For Leo" written on the side in my handwriting. Inside was a graveyard of failed attempts. 15 birthday cards, 15 Christmas presents, still in their wrapping paper. The books I thought he'd love, the model kits he used to be obsessed with, a sweater I'd knitted myself, and the letters, dozens of them, telling him about Clara, about my life, asking about him, telling him I loved and missed him, all of them bearing that damned return to sender stamp. I found another, smaller box, carefully taped shut. On it, in Clara's handwriting, "For Leo, for when we see him again." My heart seized. Inside were the gifts Clara herself had picked out for her brother over the years. A handheld game console, a special edition of The Lord of the Rings, a smartwatch. She had never given up hope. I didn't hesitate. I got a large box and packed everything inside with care. My letters, Clara's gifts, a silent history of rejected love. I wrote a small note with a single line. "Here is the proof you asked for." I took the heavy parcel to the post office myself and sent it by certified mail to Leo's address. This wasn't an act of blind faith anymore. This was my first shot. A few days later, Richard's lawyer called mine, requesting a meeting to discuss a new development. I knew the package had arrived. Leo sat on the floor, surrounded by gifts and letters. He had just opened a Christmas present wrapped 7 years ago. It was a Red Sox hoodie, size large. It would have fit him perfectly. He was reading a letter from me, telling him how Clara had just been accepted to MIT. Richard walked in. "What are you doing with all this junk? Your mother's playing mind games. She probably bought all this last week and sent it at once to make you feel guilty." "This letter is postmarked from 10 years ago," Leo said flatly, not looking up. "And this handwriting? It's Clara's." He was holding a small birthday card. "How would Mom have known our address to send this?" "She has lawyers," Richard snapped, a hint of panic creeping into his voice. "She's trying to drive a wedge between us, don't you see?" "What I see," Leo said, finally looking up, and for the first time there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes, "is a sweater my grandma knit for me. Mom said in her letter she found it while cleaning. How would she know about that sweater, Dad?" Richard had no answer. His house of cards was beginning to tremble under the weight of small, true things. For Leo, a shift was happening. He was no longer a parrot repeating his father's words. He had started asking questions, and that's what Richard feared most. I didn't know what effect it would have, or if it would be thrown straight into the trash, but I had to try. I had to remind him that before all the lies, there was love. While waiting for a miracle that might not come, I threw myself into more practical work. I called Evelyn Reed, Clara's mentor and close friend. Evelyn was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who was fiercely loyal. When I told her the story, she said only, "Clara would never have let this happen. She would have been prepared." Evelyn helped me get into Clara's personal hard drive, a labyrinth of files and encryption I could never have navigated on my own. After hours of searching, we found a folder protected by multiple passwords. Its name, Project Odysseus. I understood immediately. Odysseus, the Greek hero who took 20 years to find his way home. It's what Clara had called her search for her brother. Inside that folder was the result of 2 years of quiet investigation. Clara had hired the best private investigator in Boston. She knew where Richard and Leo were, but she hadn't just been looking. She'd been digging, and what she found made me grab the edge of the desk to steady myself. The documents showed Richard had been moving constantly between states, not for work, but to run from creditors. But the biggest shock was in another file related to my parents' will. When they passed, they'd left a small trust fund, about $50,000, for both of their grandchildren, Leo and Clara, to be accessed when they turned 21. Richard, as Leo's guardian, had withdrawn the entire sum.
And then, the final killing blow, a bank statement showing the entire amount being transferred to a shell company before disappearing. Clara had marked it with a red pen. This company is registered under the name of Linda Morrison's business partner, Dad's second wife. Richard hadn't just abandoned us. He hadn't just poisoned his son's mind. He had stolen from him. He had taken the small inheritance his grandparents had left him and used it to fund his new life. I just sat there, staring at the screen, not with a sense of victory, but with a pain deeper than before. This wasn't a weapon to win a lawsuit. This was a truth that could completely destroy what little faith Leo had left in his father, and I was the one who had to light the fuse. I didn't give these documents to my lawyer. This wasn't a legal matter anymore. This was family, and it had to be settled within the four walls of this house. I called Leo. My voice was frighteningly calm. "I need to see you, alone." "I'm not going anywhere without my father," Leo answered, his voice still defensive. "Then bring him," I said. "But come, Clara left something for you. You deserve to know what it is." They arrived the next afternoon. Richard walked in with a smug look, probably thinking I was ready to surrender. Leo looked anxious. Maybe the package had shaken him more than he let on. We sat in the living room, a tense silence hanging in the air. I decided not to attack. I started with my own truth. "Leo," I said, looking my son straight in the eye, "I need you to know something. I am sorry. 15 years ago, I failed to reach you. I let you be manipulated by lies, and that was my failing. But I never, ever stopped loving you. Not for a single day." Richard scoffed. "That's a nice performance, Eleanor. But it's too little, too late. We're here to talk about the money." "We just want what we deserve," Leo echoed, but his voice faltered a little. That's when I placed the neatly printed Project Odysseus file on the coffee table between us. "Clara agreed with you, Leo. You do deserve what's yours." I pushed the file on the embezzled trust fund toward him. "This is your grandparents' will, and this is the proof of how your father took your share. Clara left you something, not money, the truth." Leo picked up the papers, his hand shaking slightly. He read, turning page after page. His expression went from skeptical to confused, then to stark white. He looked up at Richard, his eyes filled with a silent, desperate question. What is this?" he stammered. "Dad, you said that money was lost in the 2008 market crash." Richard panicked, his calm facade shattered. "It's fake. She forged it. Don't believe her, Leo. She's always wanted to tear us apart." He lunged for the papers, but Leo held them tight. And in that moment of chaos, a sound cut through the tension, the chime of a text message from Leo's phone. Mechanically, Leo glanced down at the screen. He froze. He read the message, then read it again. His face transformed, confusion giving way to a horrified, sickening realization. In the dead silence of the room, Leo read the message out loud. His voice was flat, devoid of all emotion. "Richard, the casino in Atlantic City can't wait any longer. Will the money from your daughter's inheritance solve things?" The message, sent from an unknown number, was the perfect checkmate that Evelyn had arranged after contacting one of Richard's biggest creditors. Richard was speechless, his mouth hanging open, out of excuses.
Every one of his lies had led to this dead end. Leo slowly got to his feet. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed on the man who was his father, the man who had turned his life into a lie. There was no yelling, no explosion of anger, just a cold, quiet contempt. "You're not taking another dime from her," Leo said, his voice flat, "and you're not getting anything more from me." He turned, placed the file on the table, and walked straight out the door without a single look back. The lawsuit was dropped the very next day. Richard Thorne vanished from my life, and, from what I heard, from Boston, buried in debt and disgrace. Months went by in silence. I started putting my life back together, focusing on setting up a charitable foundation in Clara's name. But a corner of my heart was still empty. Then, one spring afternoon, the doorbell rang again. It was Leo. He looked thinner, a little more gray at the temples, but his eyes were clear again. The bitterness was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet sadness. We just stood there on the threshold for a moment. Finally, he handed me a small box. Inside was the old photograph I'd sent, now in a simple wooden frame. He didn't say I'm sorry. Maybe those words were just too hard to find. Instead, he asked a question that meant so much more. Can you tell me about her?" His voice was a little rough. The tears I'd held back for so long finally came. I nodded, unable to speak, and opened my arms. For the first time in 15 years, I pulled my son into a hug. He hesitated for just a second, then wrapped his arms around me. We stood there for a long time, two broken people trying to piece a family back together. A year later, Leo and I stood together in front of a modern glass building on the MIT campus. A gentle breeze blew, carrying the scent of new plantings. On the granite wall, in silver letters, were the words, "The Clara Vance Center for Innovation." Her legacy wasn't $35 million. It was what that money could create. Scholarships for brilliant young women, labs for young scientists, a place where bright minds could turn crazy ideas into reality. Leo didn't say anything, just gently took my hand. His hand was calloused, but warm. We weren't a perfect family. The scars were still there, and maybe they'd never fully fade. But we were a family that had fought its way out of the ashes of lies. We'd found our way back to each other. And as I looked up at my daughter's name shining in the sun, I knew that this was the most precious legacy of all. Not money, not revenge, but truth, forgiveness, and the ability to build something beautiful from the ruins. That was the final lesson Clara taught us all.